This is our first test with as little lead-in as possible. Okay. PR market pitch. I can also see the screen. You are going to understand your notes better than I am, so I'm going to let you kind of lead. Good morning, everyone. It is Friday morning, which means it's Gateway office hours. We're here at Gateway and going to be talking a little bit today about getting some PR for your company. Everyone that's launching a company wants that good press, but unfortunately for you, nobody cares. And that's the theme of today, nobody caring. I'm here with my co-founder, Carter, as always.
Howdy.
And we're going to give you some tips and tricks on how to go get yourself some PR, build the relationships without paying a crap ton of money to a PR person.
Yeah, I mean, I want to talk a little bit, generally about storytelling as a founder. In the importance of it. First, though, I think we should chat a little bit about the rumor that surfaced. I first noticed it yesterday.
Rumor
of Jim O'Neill being a potential pick for the head of the FDA.
Okay.
He's. I think a lot of people don't like him as a pick because he's. I think the words were an insane libertarian.
Oh, well, so he fits the mold of the cabinet.
Yeah, hell, I mean, I like libertarians, so I don't consider that insane, but I think a lot of people don't like libertarian philosophy generally, and they think he's crazy as a result of that. However, he's pro-cannabis. And the interesting thing about that is it's the FDA that has the power to determine that a drug has medicinal benefit.
Interesting.
So
you're saying up until this point, the DEA and the FDA have been in cahoots in kind of keeping cannabis at Schedule 1.
Yeah. The FDA needs to be in cahoots in order for the DEA to get away with saying it's Schedule 1.
I got you.
I'm not sure about the actual legality of that. I'm not a lawyer, but like basically that's the FDA that sets like, hey, this has medicinal value or it doesn't. And or at least maybe if they're silent, the DEA can say it doesn't. But if the FDA is like, yeah, this has medicinal value, it's very hard for the DEA to disagree with them.
Okay, so once again, we find ourselves in kind of the unknown.
Yeah, now the issue is like, it's just a rumor. I tried to look up where the rumor came from. I think Bloomberg said it first, but they didn't really cite where their source was. So it could just be bullshit. There's another guy that's, I think a lot of people like because he's more traditional. And I say people, just not necessarily cannabis people or us, but Washington type people.
Sure.
Named Scott Gottlieb, and I couldn't really find any information. I looked up a little bit last night to see like what does he think about cannabis. It's not clear because there's a doctor in New Jersey who's a pro-cannabis guy named Scott Gottlieb who has the same name, and I don't think they're the same person. So
that's unfortunate.
Google was making it hard for me to search. So I'm not totally sure on that one, and we don't know who the pick is going to be. But it's I think the first ray of hope that we've seen as an industry from this administration. So,
all right,
I guess we can hold on to it.
Yeah. Well, if you guys know anything that's going on at the FDA, be sure to let us know. Yeah. Kind of speaking about news and stuff. I don't know. This is a weird transition. I always think, I was thinking of PR and the news, and I automatically think back to Newsies, which is kind of in line with our theme for our party tonight. Is this a terrible transition?
What's Newsies?
Well, you know the movie, like the musical Newsies.
I never watched it. Oh, is that?
Come on.
No, I never saw it. Sorry.
All right. Well, it's like kind of set in the same time period as like speakeasies and stuff like that.
Yeah, no.
This is where I'm going with this.
Like there are images in my head flashing about like kids on the street corner selling newspapers.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that was that
one.
So,
yes.
Yeah.
So tonight we have.
I watched Book of Mormon.
God, this
That
is
was the only
terrible.
Broadway show I
Cut next. We have our 1-year anniversary, our second annual Speakeasy party, which we have declared that we will continue doing Speakeasy parties until it's federally legal. Yeah, it's going to be a good time. All the proceeds are going to SSDP to help continue the advocacy fight. Magnolia Wellness has been helping us out as a sponsor, as they always do, just helping out, being a big supporter of our program.
Yeah.
So it's just going to be a great time. If you haven't registered yet, go to gatewayturns1.eventbrite.com, and the password is Gateway Radar with a capital G and a capital R.
So it's super secret.
Super, super duper secret. If you show up with the donation in hand, we might let you in.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Are we good?
I think we're good.
On the news. Okay.
On to PR.
Yeah, let's
and
jump
nobody
into PR.
caring.
So
let's just start with, why does nobody care?
Well, yeah, I mean, so we had PR was one of the things we talked about with the cohort this week. We had Johnny Startup. John Greachin in to talk about that. Yeah.
And also Sarah Brown from Gateway Radar.
And Sarah Elder.
And Sarah Elder, our personal PR person.
Right.
Who we actually, just because, I feel like we need to say this, we waited for about 6 to 8 months before we hired Sarah.
Yeah. And we use her for something very specific, which is not what we're going to be talking about necessarily.
Right. But she has great advice.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of founders, the kind of standard thing is, I'm launching next week. I need to get into TechCrunch, right? And thus the phrase from Johnny Startup, actually, nobody cares, right? Nobody cares. There's a million people doing the thing you're doing.
It's like, another edible. Congratulations.
All right, who cares? And so the question is, how do you get the PR? How do you get the marketing? What do you do, especially when you have no budget?
Yeah.
I've talked about this before, but I've made the mistake before of hiring a marketing expert from not the startup world for a startup. That doesn't work well at all.
Yeah.
Maintaining a brand when you have a big budget and building a brand when you have zero budget are two completely different skill sets.
Yeah, it's like, if we apply $30,000 to some AdWords and another $15,000 to some Facebook ads, we should be golden, right?
Right. And it's like, yeah, great. Now we have $3.
$3
right, yeah.
and $1.50.
What do we do with that? yeah. So, which founders are, I'm sure, can relate to.
Yeah.
So, I think the big takeaway, I won't maybe not takeaway. The big thing to remember as a founder is your job, especially if you're the CEO founder, your job is basically to be the keeper of the story. Right. And actually, Jim Collins talks about this for CEOs generally in one of his books. I don't remember which one. But your job is to tell the story of the company. And you actually need to be spending a large percentage of your time doing that, more than you would think. And that's why you see founders who can pitch well and articulate what they're doing get funded more often than people who maybe have a better product but can't.
Sure.
Which is why, I think even John Greachin mentioned this, like if you build it, they will come doesn't happen, right? That doesn't happen. And so the reason that you're the storyteller as a founder is you have to convince a lot of people, because you have no resources. You can't throw money around, right? And even if you did, you have to convince people to work with you. You have to convince investors to work with you. You have to convince potential customers to give you a try, right? Or to talk about you. You have to convince founders or advisors, and you're constantly needing to convince people.
Yeah. Your loved ones, your family.
Yeah. Convince your loved ones to not shoot you, right? Because you're never home.
or leave you.
Or making any money, right? So you do a lot of storytelling as a founder, and one of the common mistakes that I know both of us have seen is founders who view marketing and PR as this separate thing they can hire for, right? They're just like, I need a marketing person to do the fucking marketing, right? And at some point, you do need to hire marketing people. But originally, you need to be, just like with every other job as a founder, you need to be the marketing person. And even once you hire marketing people, you never cease to become the main storyteller.
Sure.
And so I think it's, it's important for us to maybe talk about what it means to be the storyteller, how you go about being the storyteller, and then maybe some more practical hacks for how you end up getting some press.
Yeah, and I think general startup practice is starting to embed this in founders, right? Because people are often starting with the pitch, and when you're pitching, if you're doing it right, you're actually building a story, and you're figuring out what your key talking points are and what the climax of your story is. Exactly. Is it the product itself? Is it the background of the product and how it's being applied to the industry? Is it your team? Like, what is your background? I mean, one thing that's really standing out that I'm noticing in the cannabis industry is that the origin stories are very interesting to people. Like, is this person a veteran? Is this person an executive from Apple? As IC just launched their Defonce episode today, and coming up with that experience of branding and marketing from Apple is very valuable in an industry that has historically lacked a focus on branding and marketing.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, for good reason, by the way. The industry, spending marketing dollars didn't make sense.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think, let's delve into that. It's a decent transition to the why, which we can talk about in a minute. But I do want to make sure people understand when you're telling your story, at least kind of three, well, let's say at least two things to be aware of. One is to be aware of your audience, right? Who you're telling the story to. Investors care about different things than a potential co-founder, than a potential customer, than the public. And so being very aware of your audience is important. But also being aware of the medium through which the story is being told. Is this something that they're going to read? Is it something they're going to hear you say? Is it a casual conversation in a coffee shop, or is it, are you on stage in front of 1,000 people? Right? Those are obviously very different. And founders need to be able to do all of those things really well and consistently. So it actually needs to be the same story told in different ways.
Yes.
With different emphasis on different things. And so let's just walk through that a little bit, and let's start with what you were talking about, which is kind of the why. One thing that, early stage investors, I mean, everyone cares about the why. The why you're doing this apart from making money.
Yeah.
Right. And
it's different for the audience, right? Like the investors want to know that you're not going to quit your company.
Right.
While a consumer might really care about, oh, did a fairy just fly in?
Yeah. Now we're on the Disney Channel.
Right? Those sparkles go across the street. I don't even know if they heard it.
We heard it. That's all that matters. So we can look insane.
We're the only ones hearing this right now.
Yeah.
No, but it's like if you're talking to your customers, maybe they care more about like where your heart is. Like what are you doing as a company?
Right. And so, a lot of people think of pitching as an investor specific thing. So let's start there, right? If you're, I view it as a continuum of like first check in, like, the friends and family round or the angel round, all the way to your series, D or IPO or whatever, right? On that continuum, your why matters much more in the early stage of that. For the camera, maybe it's this way, right? The why matters much more at the early angel stage, and less later, right? Later on, and the reason for that is later on they're looking at
metrics.
They're looking at your cash, right? They're like, oh, how's the business?
Yeah.
What are your profits? What are your revenues? How are you growing? Like they're looking at numbers, right? And even if you just take a very broad look at it, when you look at startups, those rounds when you see like Goldman Sachs coming in, that's what they're looking at, right? Yes. Goldman Sachs doesn't come in because they think you're a great swell fellow, right? Yeah. They come in because they
want the up and to the right.
Right, and they're just looking at historical financials and projected financials and saying like, yeah, this looks like a good idea, right? So they're very much more numbers focused. But when you're getting your first angel money, you can't be really numbers focused because you don't have any numbers. And the why is very important because it is the reason why you will get out of bed in the morning and continue to work on your company even when
when it's hard.
Right.
Because it is hard, right?
Right.
Like I haven't heard of an entrepreneur's journey where there wasn't, whether it be small or a very large trough of sorrow, or just, it's inevitable.
The trail of tears.
The trail of tears.
That's insensitive, but
yeah,
it's horrible, right? So, and I think we've quoted Adeo on this before, but Adeo Resi, has said, he was asked in an interview, why do startups fail, and he said, well, there's only one reason startups fail: the founder stops working on them.
Right.
And that's the big risk from an early money perspective is, will this person or this team stick with it? And so the why is your origin story. It's relatable from a human perspective. Not everyone has, some people have very dramatic whys, right? Some people don't, and they have to, figure out what their why is and be able and figure out how to communicate that in a dramatic way.
Yeah.
But everyone has some reason that you're in this industry. There's other ways you could be making money. There's other things to do. Why are you doing this particular thing?
Yeah.
Right.
So let's chisel this out really quick, just as it pertains to PR specifically. Take a look at the stories that people are following and understand kind of like why you're unique and how you might be able to spin a story around that. What is interesting about it? I know with some of the companies came out of our first cohort, Octavia Wellness has gotten a lot of traction lately because of Carrie's connection through her mother and Alzheimer's and finding out about medicine and then using that as kind of like how she got into the industry and how she kind of...
And it's a compelling story.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
And at the end of the day, people writing about you want to, I'll say sell newspapers, but no one does that anymore. They want clicks. They want clicks, right? And so it's got to be a human relatable story, right? So knowing your audience, what you emphasize in your story changes, but there always needs to be something human relatable. So obviously for an investor, maybe you emphasize the money. For another stakeholder, maybe you emphasize the cool work that you get to do if you come join the company. But there's always that story component, which is really, really important. I think we should mention, because a lot of people don't know, this is partly PR, partly pitch discussion a little bit, but
I'll keep bringing it back to PR.
I know
you can talk about whatever you want.
I know, but we did some pitch practice this week, and go to Guy Kawasaki's 10 slides.
Yes.
Go look at his points. That's not the order or the format you need to necessarily use, but you need to hit all those points when you're talking to investors, and so that should give people a starting point.
Sure.
But formulating a story out of that is hard. So one thing I think we also saw when we did pitch practice yesterday, and we've seen in the past, it's hard to write a story. It's hard to tell a story, and it's not something, if you're not used to doing it, it's not something that's super easy. And so one of the problems people make is they try and become very abstract. Right? They try and say very broad sweeping statements and use abstract terms to describe what they're doing. I'm trying to think of an example, but the edibles industry is I'm trying to think about how they would describe. There's a lot of consumer demand. Here's just a very simple. There's a lot of consumer demand for confectionaries in the edible industry. Okay, but you could just say people like brownies.
Yep.
Right. And
not picking on anyone in particular.
No, actually wasn't. I was just trying to think of a story or think of an example. But humans tend to be, and I said this yesterday to everyone, and I think it's just important to remind people, humans tend to be able to move mentally from concrete to abstracts much more easily than they can move from abstracts to concretes. So if you are talking about an abstract concept, it's very difficult for your audience to relate to you and really understand what that translates into. Yeah. But if you're talking about a concrete, they can very easily generalize that. So, if maybe, let's say you're doing something that has a particular purpose, it's starting, let's talk about growing cannabis, right? If you talk about, this thing that I'm building is very good for doing X, Y, and Z to cannabis plants and blah, blah, blah. But maybe you have a bigger vision where this could apply to agriculture generally and other products, right? It's easier for people to hear specifically how it will help cannabis and cannabis farmers, and then generalize to like, oh, it actually could work for tomatoes or whatever else, right? It's much easier for that than like, this works for plants,
right?
Generally,
yeah.
Right?
So yeah, so like you know, before even getting into building the storyline, and this is going to tie it into kind of how we approach PR, is really understand what it is exactly that you do and say it as simply and clearly as possible, like 10 words or less.
Right.
You know, some people say a tagline, but not as marketing oriented as a tagline, but like just what do you do, and like is it super clear, and who are you doing it for? And then the next level of that is, what are your 3 key, you know, talking points or differentiators? Like how do people define your company versus any of your competitors in the space?
Yeah.
And if you can do those, you know, those 2 things, it's like 4 elements, right? The tagline or the 1 sentence, and then the 3 talking points, and you can nail that, and you can find ways to ingrain it in every conversation that you have. People will start to remember who you are, what you do, and it'll be clear, and they'll actually want to talk to you because you'll make sense when you're talking.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think one of the things we do there is separate so usually we have people work on all of that messaging from an internal perspective. And the reason we say internal is we don't want people to worry about how it sounds from a marketing perspective.
Sure.
We just want them to worry about how it sounds. Like, is it clear and accurate? And just getting to that point is hard.
Yes.
Like clearly and accurately defining those. Then after that, then you can come in and say, okay, well, how would we communicate those in a more marketing way, right? How do we turn our 1 sentence into a tagline? How do we, how do we do that? And then, you know, doubling down on what you just said, you know, talking to reporters are busy. They've got a lot of other stories they're working on in other industries often. And so educating them, it's important to educate them, but you don't do that during an interview. Right? Generally during an interview, you do exactly what you just said, where you take those 3 things or whatever, those differentiators, you have some canned lines that really are worded properly, that can be used as quotes, that you repeat over and over again, right? Politicians are bad examples of many things, but they're a good example for this.
Bringing that conversation back to what they want to talk about.
Exactly, right? I don't know if you remember in the Republican debates, even Marco Rubio was like mocked for that because he like, no matter what,
he's a robot.
He would actually like say the same thing, and he was a little bit too obvious about it.
Right.
Everyone else was just a little more savvy.
He caught politics 101 and like stopped there.
yeah. But that's what everyone does, right? Sure. And the smarter politicians just do it a little bit more subtly, so you don't notice.
Yeah.
And so, but that's what marketing people do as well, and especially it's necessary when you're talking to reporters because they're looking for those like really well worded, distilled sound bites that they can throw into an article, so they really get it, and so their audience really gets it. So. Right. Just repeating those over and over again, it will inevitably end up in the article. Yeah.
So you were pointing out how busy reporters are.
Yeah.
So I wanted to dig into kind of like some of the tactical approach of getting their attention and getting them to write about.
Yeah. Okay. So let's do that. Let's do the concrete. Let's do the kind of concrete hacks or whatever.
So let's just start at the beginning. You have a blank slate, right? It's like I have no PR contacts. I want to get in TechCrunch. The first thing to do is like you don't just email info@techcrunch.com, right? It's very much like selling your product. You never sell to an inanimate object, you sell to a person. Same with PR. You're selling your story to a person. So you got to find out first who those people are. Like who's writing stories on cannabis. You can start there, very surface level. But then you want to drill even deeper, like who's writing stories on cannabis edibles, or who's writing stories about origin stories about people in cannabis, or there are people that will speak very specifically to whatever it is that your story is.
Yeah, and I think the key actually even before that was what you said. You said, where do you start? And I think starting is important.
Yes,
right.
Yes, that's true.
We use this. We use
rewind.
Right. Like you build a time machine and you go back 3 months ago because that's when you needed to start talking to the reporter.
Yeah.
So I think we talked about this during office hours with someone I think last week, but it's more like exercise, right? You can't. The night before your bodybuilding competition, you can't be like, oh, I guess it's time to stop eating Ben and Jerry's and go to the gym.
Right.
Right. Like you have to have been doing that for a long time in order to get on stage at your bodybuilding competition. Right. And so PR is very similar, and you can't the night like, oh, we're launching next week. Do you want to write about us? Like, no, actually, you launching isn't a story.
Yeah.
And I have no relationship with you, so it's too late.
Yeah.
So starting is the first step.
So starting.
And then I like what you're saying, like finding reporters or writers who might be interested in your industry and what you're doing.
And you can start reaching out to them, like you're saying, before you even have a product.
You should absolutely, yeah.
Start
not to pitch them.
Start identifying yourself as a knowledge expert on that category, and feeding them information, building the relationship, building the line of trust,
providing value to them.
Yes,
that's not about you pitching your company.
Sure.
Yeah, and the other idea that I would say cannabis founders in particular should consider is they think of themselves as in the cannabis industry. And so they go after cannabis writers. But that's actually not true. You're probably in another industry as well, right? You're B2B software for the cannabis industry, or you're in edible, so you're food for the cannabis industry, or you're whatever you are, right? And there are people who write about food, and there are people who write about B2B software.
Right.
And cannabis is a hook. It's a hot, interesting topic. And someone who covers your industry will be interested in hearing from, potentially, someone who's in that industry, but there's a cannabis hook in the story, right? And so, follow those people as well. Interact with them on Twitter. Comment on things. Give them feedback. Connect them with information. Start to build a relationship with the people who you think could someday want to cover you.
I feel like we're just verbal, like just unloading. Like
I know. I feel like maybe we should have divided this into subtopics because there's too many things I want to talk about.
Every topic leads into this other tangent. But what I would say is every publication and every reporter speaks to a different audience, and so you need to actually think about what it is that you're trying to accomplish.
Perfect. Yes, exactly.
Like, are you trying to get more customers, or are you actually trying to go and get investors? That could mean the difference between being in Dope magazine and being in Forbes, completely different strategies. And, depending on what you're trying to do, maybe equally effective.
Yeah, absolutely. So start early, figure out who you're talking to, and build the relationships with the people that could potentially help you later on.
Okay. So that's largely getting people to write about you.
Yes.
Do you know where I'm going to go next?
I hope.
Okay. It doesn't always have to be someone writing about you. It could be you writing.
There we go. That's that is where I thought you were going.
Okay, cool. So contributed content is an incredible way of validating yourself as a knowledge expert. I don't know why I keep saying knowledge expert today. That's
I don't know, subject matter expert.
Subject matter expert. Anyways,
a knowledge expert. I'm someone really good at pedagogy. I don't know.
It's Friday. All right.
I'm a knowledge expert.
So get to writing. Same with PR. It's like exercise. Start writing today. Refine your skills. Determine where you want to be a subject matter expert.
Right.
And just start doing it. You could start publishing on your own blog, but people want content, and the easiest way to get content is for people to hand it to them.
We're focused intentionally on stuff that's free and cheap to do right now, right? We're not talking about buying a billboard on 101.
Right.
So communicating with reporters is free. Writing yourself, having a blog and putting yourself out there as a subject matter expert, and maybe even getting carried, because people are looking for content, eventually getting carried by someone else, like that's free. It takes you time, but that's what you have. Well, you don't have that either, but you got more than money, right? So speaking at conferences, another thing. If you start to write, if you have a blog and you start to get recognized as someone who has something to say that's interesting about the subject, or maybe you get picked up, maybe Dope carries an article of yours or something, you're more likely to then get speaking engagements.
Yeah.
That also will help get you some press and recognition. All these things are free. The caveat, by the way, is there are conferences who charge people to speak. That's not what we're talking about. Never pay to speak ever as a startup. It's not those aren't legitimate conferences in my book. Sorry, picking people off, but like that's not a legitimate conference.
Yeah.
That's a con.
Right.
So there are those conferences. I'm not talking about paying to speak. I'm talking about conferences that bring speakers in because they want the subject and they want the speaker and they think that's interesting to the audience.
Yeah.
And those conferences are out there. In fact, we're doing a thing at South by Southwest this year. It's not even a cannabis conference, right? Because cannabis is interesting and people want to hear about it. So look into conferences that you could potentially speak at. But to do that, you build a portfolio of having had something to say over a long period of time.
And so just again, tactically, when you want to get a piece written, so say you write a piece for a blog, reach out to some people at these publications that you would like to see it in, that you think it would fit well, present it in an email, write an abstract, just like a quick abstract. In fact, you could write the abstract before you even write the piece, depending on what your plans are. But you could actually like submit it and see if people are even interested in it, and they'll tell you. They'll just be like, yeah, let's see it. Make it about 500, 600 words.
Right.
And it's like, okay, I can do that.
Yep.
And then you'll find that different publications have different rules, or some like to see the full article right up front.
Right.
But what Sarah Elder recommend is always just put it in the body of the email, because you're always guaranteed that they'll at least glance at the email, generally guaranteed. But they won't click
unless it's an email to me.
Yeah. Well. Yeah, that's a whole nother story. But they won't necessarily click on an attachment.
Right.
So keep it concise, hook them, get them committed, and then write a great piece. And it's a game changer when you can start getting published into these highly circulated publications.
Yep. Another thing you can do is partnerships, right? You can again on the free to cheap side of things, right? Is partnerships. So value for value exchange with people where they'll cross promote or whatever. That's another way to get some reach without spending a lot of money.
Great.
So yeah, can you think of any other low-hanging fruit from a cheaper or free thing to do?
No, I mean it's refining your story and being an interesting person, and like I'm not the most outgoing or public speaking oriented person, but it does get easier the more you do it and the more often, and having your talking points like set and knowing that that's what you want to come out anytime you talk to someone is super important.
Yeah, practice make perfect, but it makes better.
Practice approach is perfect.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people aren't comfortable in, I prefer one-on-one conversations to being on Facebook Live or speaking in front of a large audience, right?
Yeah.
But I've learned how to do those things, and hopefully I'll be improving at both of those as time goes by. So it's not something that you just have to naturally be good at. It's something you have to practice. And writing is another example. I think a lot of people struggle with writing, but I can't emphasize enough how many people are, how many publications are really desperate for content. Because more content is better SEO, it's more clicks. They don't want to pay because they don't make any money anymore. So, free content can be a great strategy. As Johnny Startup said, everyone's doing it now. So,
right.
Some sort of differentiation is important. But yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I guess a newsletter also. So this is another thing you can, you should have a email list that you're collecting, that you're continually adding to, of all the people you interact with, either through the website or people you meet, and be emailing them. I wouldn't spam them. I think once a week is too much, probably. but maybe once every other week. It depends on the industry and what you're doing. But
Yeah.
just giving them some information and
Salespeople would argue with you.
Right, salespeople want every day fucking email. But I unsubscribe to those.
Yes.
So it depends. It depends what you're trying to do. But the point is, there is some periodicity that works for your industry and what you're trying to do. And that's another kind of cheap and easy thing to do, to have people, keep you top of mind.
Right.
With people you're going after.
Okay.
I think we covered a lot of stuff.
I think that's good. I mean, it all comes down to start now, develop your story.
Know your audience.
Know your audience.
What you're
be
wanting
targeted.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just get to work. I mean, start writing and getting yourself out there, and it often, like many things in life, it comes down to relationships and having like a push and pull, right? It's like, them giving you press is a huge benefit to you. So what are you going to do for them?
Right. And and like you said, I mean, it's about doing it now. You can't wait till the last minute, right? It's a long play.
Right.
So, I think that's it. Speaking of long plays, is this long enough?
Yeah, it's totally long enough. It's longer than enough.
Okay.
All right, guys.
Come tonight.
Come tonight. Here. Well, up there.
Up there.
Yeah. So, yeah, this is going to be the worst ending ever.
That's all right. Thanks for watching.
Nobody cares.
Share, like, subscribe on Facebook or whatever we're supposed to say.
Yeah.
And we'll see people tonight and or next week.